Welcome back to another episode. Today we cover the Eiche, which is the, I think, fourth part of our tree series, from Waldhilfe, which means tree, help or support, from the article Waldbäume, die wichtigsten Baumarten in Deutschland. I just called it a tree series, and yeah, we're gonna start. First episode we of course covered the Fichte, then we covered the Kiefer and the Rotbuche. As always, I'm gonna translate it word by word in the sentence structure, so the English words for the German sentence structure, and like in context. So let's start. First of all, a content-wise introduction. The Eiche, so the oak, I think it's called. Gonna look it up. Yeah, should be oak. Sorry, different. This one, oak. It should be called oak. It usually looks like this. It has these like rounded edges of the leaves, which is very typical for them. They have this also very typical bark, which is very, in German we call it, I would say, gerillt. Like, it has deep grooves basically, so yeah, and it has of course these, what's it called? Eichen in German? I don't necessarily know. Acorns. It has these typical acorns, which of course have these, I would call them like hats kind of things, and the typical shape. I believe every one of you has probably seen one before. And yeah, oak wood I think is also one of the strongest woods. It rather like belongs to the harder woods, like the class basically of harder woods. And let me just have a look. Is there anything else to say? Yeah, they belong to the Quercus, I think, type. They have different types of, there are different types of oaks. I think it's called Steineiche, I believe, in German. If I'm not completely mistaken. Which is holm oak. Let me just look it up. Steineiche, which is I think the most common one. Then we have, let me just look up the kind of types. So that just means oak types. And let me plug in my cables always. Sorry. And yeah, then we have Arten und Sorten, just for a quick introduction. Deutsche Eiche, which means German oak. Let me pull up Deutsche Eiche, which looks like, I don't know, there are probably not too huge differences between them. Goldeiche, Stieleiche. Yeah, Stieleiche is also very popular. It looks like this. I think it has bigger leaves. Also, the acorns look a bit different, but I think they're also very popular. Then, what I was also wanting to say is I don't know if it's there. Pflaumeiche, Traubeneiche. Yeah, they look a bit different. And Roteiche is also very popular. I think at least in Germany. Which the leaves look entirely different, and yeah, they have kind of, not necessarily in terms of the leaves, but I think like there is also this tree called Rotbuche, which you're also gonna pull up, and I think it also turns red in autumn, which is why they both are called Rot, so red something. And another one I wanted to pull up was, I don't know what it's called, but like Mediterrane Eiche, which is like, I don't know what it's called, Steineiche, or maybe it's actually the basically stone oak, or like holm oak I think it was called, so maybe Steineiche. So yeah, we already pulled that up, and yeah, it should look like that, which it has a bit of a like different shape, like smaller tree, like stem, I think it's called. Stem, I don't know. Stamm in German. Stem, I think. And typically more like with these kinds of different, I wouldn't say stems, like parts of the stem, like kind of like Ast, it's called in German, a branch, but like more down, like part of the stem. You could call it a split stem maybe. They typically look more like that, or like this. And yeah, like in contrary to, for example, I think it was called Eiche, maybe this. I don't know if it's correct, but they have more of a straight stem. My god, I can't talk. And are typically higher. Or for example, Stiel Eiche, I think it's also higher, has more of a straight stem. And yeah, that was it for the kind of introduction in terms of the content. I don't know too much about them, but like a little. And yeah, I don't know. Maybe you can, if you want to, you can of course also look up more about it, but in general I think that was it for the content-wise introduction. They belong to the Quercus in English. In German you would say Quercus. What's it called? Classification something, I don't know. And also what I know is that you can actually eat acorns if you soak them in water for long enough and then bake them or something, but yeah. So, let's start. Die Eiche hat in Deutschland schon sehr lange Symbolcharakter. So findet sich auch heute noch das Eichenlaub auf deutschen Centstück des Euros. So, die Eiche, the oak, has in Deutschland, in Germany, schon sehr lange Symbolcharakter. Schon, already, sehr, very, lange. In this case, it means long ago. It can also just mean long in terms of size, but lange, it can also be written sehr lang, but lange is rather, in this case, used, even though it's kind of the feminine version. Because, like, for example, lange Hose, because it's die. And you would say, for example, der lange Baum, which is masculine and of course more of the standard. And for neutral, you would say like das lange Jahr, for example, the long year. And what I'm trying to say is that it's kind of unusual when you look at it from a perspective of a non-German speaker, because usually you would of course use the masculine version, so you have a kind of neutral version, but in this case lange is I think evolved over time to be the kind of, not necessarily poetic, but like this is what you use if you describe something in terms of being long in terms of time, and not necessarily lang, because it kind of sounds up, but I think it doesn't matter too much. But in writing you'll always find that with an E at the end to be the form used for that. So, Symbolcharakter, which means symbol, of course. Charakter is character. Don't be confused, sometimes you'll also find the word Charakter being pronounced Charakter. This is when you speak of Charakter or character, of in English of course called character, in terms of a personality, for example, or I think mostly used in TV shows, in of course movies or films. And character is in this case more in terms of personality, of just general a person, like ich habe einen tollen Charakter, I have a good character, ich habe tollen Charakter, or you have, du hast einen tollen Charakter, versus, for example, spielt, maybe it's not the perfect sentence, or maybe I'll just take it. Spielt einen Charakter. It might actually be wrong, and not necessarily wrong, but people might actually still use character in this case, but like in general, I think most people pronounce it Charakter, but of course, also a reason why it's pronounced Charakter is because the plural form of this is Charaktere, so this might also be a reason why people, in this case, at least sometimes pronounce it Charakter, or mostly, I don't know. So, die Eiche hat in Deutschland schon sehr lange Symbolcharakter, so symbol character you could say, so is being used as a symbol and has this kind of, you could kind of say aura to it, not necessarily aura, but like this, what's it called, this legendary status, something like that. So, symbol character, I don't know if you say that in English. Yeah, symbolic character, maybe rather. So, the oak has in Germany already very long symbol character, so the oak has been a symbol or symbolic character in Germany for a very long time. So findet sich auch heute noch das Eichenlaub auf deutschen Centstücken des Euros. So, or this way, finds, sich, in this case, itself, auch heute, also today, noch, still, das, the neutral form, Eichenlaub, of course referring to the Laub because the nouns in German, if you have a noun that's made up by two nouns, so for example Eichenlaub, so basically das Laub der Eiche, which you like can put together to das Eichenlaub, the oak leaves. In English it's written apart. And you have to put an N between that because kind of that signifies the kind of genitive case or something, I believe. I'm not too I don't know too much about it, but I think it's kind of like genitive case, like of, whose, wessen, der Eiche, something like that, I don't know. Google that if you want to know more about it. But Eichenlaub, so oak leaves basically. And that is neutral because of the second part, which is always the part the article refers to, so the Laub, whatever comes before that doesn't matter, so Laub is always going to be neutral. So the oak leaves, and by the way, Laub, there is not a plural form of that, I believe, or maybe Laube, not really used, but because Laub is already basically plural because it contains the multiple leaves basically. So das Eichenlaub, the oak leaves, this is why this is plural and this is basically singular form. Auf, on, or on top, or whatever you want to say that, just on. Deutschen, German, plural form. Centstücken, so cent pieces you could say. And I'm gonna just put up a picture of that. Centstück, maybe not, is it only German? I don't know, but I think it's very popular. Yeah, here we have that. This is a cent piece and this is 1 cent. This is with oak leaves on top of it. I think there is also one, if I'm not mistaken. Let me put a picture. I thought it was also with a maple leaf, but I might be completely wrong. Or maybe it's just, no. Probably have kind of confused it, but this is, I believe, Italy, because or is it French with the RNF? I don't know. Anyways, and yeah, this is this is simply this cent piece des Euros of the Euro. So findet sich auch heute noch das Eichenlaub auf deutschen Centstücken des Euros. This way or so finds itself also today still the oak leaves on top of German cent pieces of the euro. So this is why still today you can find oak leaves on top of the German cent pieces of the euro. So, die Eiche, the oak. Es gibt bei uns 2 einheimische Eichenarten. die Stieleiche und die Traubeneiche. So I wasn't completely wrong, because, yeah, I'm gonna explain that later. I'm first gonna read the text. Eichen brauchen vor allem Licht, weshalb sie, wie viele andere lichtbedürftige Baumarten, auf Dauer von der Buche verdrängt werden. Deshalb kommen sie von Natur aus vor allem auf Standorten vor, die der Buche entweder zu nass oder zu trocken sind. Die Eiche ist eine wichtige Baumart für viele hundert Insektenarten und ist deshalb auch von großem ökologischen Wert. Unsere Eichen wachsen natürlicherweise vor allem in Mischwäldern, zum Beispiel zusammen mit Hainbuchen, Linden, Ahornen, Birken und Kiefern. Eichen wachsen zwar verhältnismäßig langsam, können aber bei guter Qualität sehr gute Holzpreise erzielen. So, the oak. So, in terms of the first sentence, I'm first gonna, of course, translate that. Es, it, gibt, gives. This is, of course, the typical there is, whereas in English you have there is, there are. In German is always es gibt eine, es gibt zwei, es gibt tausend. There is one, there are two, there are 1,000. Bei uns, bei, in this case, like in general it means at or by, basically, but in this case it means you cannot necessarily translate that, I think, directly, because bei uns means basically in our home area. Uns means us, so in our home area in Germany, basically. So it gives at us zwei, two, Einheimische. This derives from the word, first of all, ein, which means one or into something. Heim, in general, derives from the word heim, which means home. Like, for example, Heimat is homeland, home area, something like where you're from. And Heimat is without the at, like Heim, which means home. Then Einheimisch, ish, heimisch means with heimisch. This means like home in terms of something being, what do you call those? Being originally from your, like, how do I say this? Heimisch. Like, for example, die Buche, you have to always connect that to a place. Buche ist in Deutschland heimisch. And then you say it is like a home or native, basically, or its home lies, you could say, in Germany. The beach, die Buche, is in Deutschland, Germany, heimisch. So home to, native to, you could rather say native to. So einheimisch means, how do I say this? It's rather, basically, you could also say native, einheimisch. I don't know if there's a big difference between heimisch and einheimisch. I don't necessarily know. I'm just gonna Google it. Einheimisch, heimisch. So, Unterschied, maybe. Unterschied means difference. So, yeah, apparently, as it said here, heimisch, it's more a feeling. Einheimisch relates to the, in brackets, geographical home place country. Ich fühle mich heimisch. Yeah, you wouldn't say that in certain circumstances, like, ich fühle mich, like, for example, the only thing I can think of is, you wouldn't say people are native to, you could say people are native to in English, but in German it makes a difference if you say die, for example, diese Menschen sind, I mean, it's a derived word, but Einheimische, you would say da, sorry, Einheimische Menschen. As what you wouldn't say is diese Menschen sind heimische. So, I don't know. I think there's not a big difference between the two words, but this you wouldn't say because this is not a word. I mean, it's a derived form of heimisch and einheimisch. Einheimisch, yeah, I think, if I think about it, actually probably is more in terms of geographical, whereas heimisch is, more of a feeling, but I've never thought about it. So, die Stieleiche und die Traubeneiche. So the Stieleiche, which translated to English oak, and the Traubeneiche. Die Eiche is of course feminine, and the grape oak basically. Traube means grape. In English it's called sessile oak or something. And so this is what I was referring to earlier, why I was saying I wasn't completely wrong, because Stieleiche is native to Germany and Traubeneiche, which I didn't know. But yeah, so Stieleiche is native. What was it again? I called it Mediterranean. It was what was it again? I forgot. Mediterrane Eiche. It was Steineiche, so basically in German stone oak was not native to Germany. This is more Mediterranean, and maybe the Roteiche or something is probably not necessarily native to Germany. I think it's more, apparently more to the US native. And so Eichen brauchen vor allem Licht. No, did I translate that as one? Like in context? No. So I'm just gonna do that once again in, like, literally in the sentence structure. It gives at us two native, basically, oak species, the, what was it again? English oak and the sessile oak or sessile oak. So in Germany there are two native oak species, the English oak and the sessile oak. Eichen brauchen vor allem Licht, weshalb sie wie viele andere lichtbedürftige Baumarten auf Dauer von der Buche verdrängt werden. Eichen oaks brauchen need vor allem, before all, or in front of all. For can have different meanings, as I said before, in front of, like in terms of time, in terms of place. But in this case, vor allem is kind of a saying, and it means like especially or above all, you could say. Above is of course not, or vor is of course not necessarily translated to above. That would rather be über allem. This is also, for example, a saying. For example, ich liebe meine Familie über alles. The saying. And you also can kind of recognize that this is also a saying similar to this. Why? Because this is basically would be a wrong case, because you would have to say über allem, like über wem, question mark. And this is where you would say über allem in general, über allem. But in this case, I think it's because it's a saying, this is the correct spelling. I don't know, Google was about to kind of correct me and saying über alles was written this way, but I'm not quite sure. I don't know. But there's also a different word which is called überall, which means everywhere. And vor allem means above all, or what was it again? There was another. Especially. So oaks need especially or above all Licht, which means light, very similar. Weshalb, so this is basically wessen, whose, and then we have the word halb, which is whose half, wessen halb, whose half. And weshalb, this doesn't necessarily have too much to do with this anymore, but it's still, you can kind of see, because halb is also at least in the words weshalb and deshalb, it's used as kind of a, you could say, justification syllable, you could say, but in general it means half of something. And so half of whose half, wessen. So yeah, in general it means like, so whose fault, whose reason, something like that. And this just means why. So Oaks needs especially, or above all odds, why, they, sie means they in this case. It can also mean she, so in English probably it, because an oak is of course a thing. So why, it or she. Wie viele andere lichtbedürftige Baumarten? Wie, like, viele, many, andere, other. This is of course anders. It's also different. Andere is the plural form of that. Other, lichtbedürftige, Licht, we had that before, this was light. Bedürftig, this, I think we had that in one of the other previous episodes where I also explained that with Bedarf, which means the need or requirement for something, or demand. And I think derives from the word dürfen, which means to be like allowed to, may. And lichtbedürftig, so Bedarf means, yeah, as I explained, the need. So bedürftig is the adjective of that. Bedürftig, which means needy, sorry. And dürftig is also like very little, or is in English you call it meager or something. Like very the least of, like, for example, when I'll say I don't know, what's the sentence? Yeah, just die Lage ist sehr dürftig. Like poor, you could say, or there is just the least given of something. And yeah. Then we have lichtbedürftig. I think you now can understand what I mean. This just means to be in the need for light. Baumarten. Baum is of course tree. Arten, plural of Art, which means species. Auf Dauer. On Dauer means, what's it called? Duration, basically. Dauer. Length of time, duration, period. And auf Dauer, it means like with the passing of time, basically. Or permanently, yeah, also it can be permanently. But in this case, it just means with the passing of time, or like as time goes by. Von, of, der Buche, von wem, so dative case, der Buche, which is the, dative case of die Buche, which is feminine. And so of the beach, verdrängt, which derives from the word drang, which means urge, or drängen, which I think also means urge. I think we also had that in the previous, or before the previous episode. And which means to urge someone. And verdrängt werden, so this is also passive form, verdrängt werden, to be urged out, basically. So it means to urge or to urge out. And let's translate that in the sentence structure of German. Eichen, oaks, need above all light, which is why, you could also say, or why they, like many other light needing tree species, on time, or after, as time goes by, you could say, or on duration of the beach, urged out, are being, you could say. So oaks need light above all, which is why they, like many other light-needing tree species, as time goes by, are being urged out by the beach. So, and another thing which I wanted to not necessarily explain, because I'm not necessarily the best at explaining grammatical structures. Like here, Eichen brauchen vor allem Licht, comma, you have a comma. This is because this is all weshalb sie, and then there is another sentence put into that, wie andere lichtbedürftige Baumarten. So this is basically this, and this is the subordinate clause, because there is always a lot of confusion over commas. I'm going to explain it, kind of. This is the main clause. Eichen brauchen vor allem Licht. This could be just a simple sentence, like that. And weshalb sie, which is why they, like many other light-needing tree species, auf Dauer von dem Buche verdrängt werden. And this is also kind of, you could say, what do you call it? Shoved into there, put into there, as another subordinate clause. I think some people might be assuming that they don't need to put a comma here because it's just a like comparison, but it's not. This is an entire like subordinate clause kind of. It can't be a clause on its own because it doesn't contain a verb, but this is like put in there, so you have to put a comma between there. If you want to learn more about it, I think, how do you call this kind of structure? Like you could say Google Nebensätze like this, or if you want to call it in English, subordinate clause German, something like that. And subordinate clause German with V, maybe something like that. And yeah, then you can learn more about it if you're interested or don't understand it and want to understand it. And we're going to move on with the next sentence. Deshalb kommen sie von Natur aus vor allem auf Standorten vor, die der Buche entweder zu nass oder zu trocken sind. Deshalb, here we have the basically opposite, or like the other form of deshalb, which you're also going to see a lot of times when you see weshalb, deshalb, or deswegen. So deshalb, this is why, basically, or therefore. Kommen, come, sie, they. Von Natur aus, we also had in a lot of the previous episodes, like a lot of 2 times maybe or something. But this of course means by nature. Of nature out, by nature. Vor allem, above all. Auf Standorten, on locations, you could say. Standorten means derived from the word stehen. Stehen, which means to stand. In English it's kind of funny because this is already the word I'm kind of trying to show you how this is built. Stehen, the past form of that, of, for example, me, the, what's it called? There is present form, there is Präteritum it's called in German. Always forgot the word. Präteritum, which is the first past form. Praeteri, something like that. And then we have, of course, the perfect. And we have the beautiful plusquam perfect. I think it's called with that, or with a minus in between. In German we call that, by the way, Bindestrich. So we call this a Bindestrich. So a hyphen. And Standorten, so basically derives from the word ich stand, or general es stand, more generally it stood. So yeah, Standorten. Ort of course means location. Also, by the way, Orten, to locate someone. Vor, so this is come vor. Vor means up, or not for. not up, sorry, means in this case up it's correct because in English you would say come up, but in German come vor means in front, before, so come in front, come before, in English you would say come up. So deshalb kommen sie von Natur aus vor allem auf Standorten vor. This is why, or therefore come they by nature out, or from nature out, or by nature above all on locations up. So therefore they come up. In English you would say, but in German it's parted and the prefix is on the like in the end, it comes at the end of the sentence. At least the main sentence clause. I think you get what I mean. Die der Buche entweder zu nass oder zu trocken sind. Die, which, plural form, or that. Der Buche, whom, wem. Der Buche, again we have the dative form. I was about to say genitive, but it's dative. Der Buche, entweder zu nass. Either, entweder, it means either. I think I'm not gonna dissect that because that doesn't make a lot of sense. Zu nass, too wet or moist, but rather moist is rather feucht in German. So rather wet. Oder zu trocken sind, or too dry are. So, word by word in the German sentence structure, or I'm gonna read it again. Deshalb kommen sie von Natur aus vor allem auf Standorten vor, die der Buche entweder zu nass oder zu trocken sind. Therefore come they by nature or from nature out, above all, on locations before, basically, or in front, that the beach either too wet or too dry are. So therefore they come up mostly by nature on locations, or they grow mostly in nature on locations, by nature on locations, in locations, basically, that are either too dry or too wet for the beach. Die Eiche ist eine wichtige Baumart für viele hundert Insektenarten und ist deshalb auch von großem ökologischen Wert. So, die Eiche, the oak, is a, feminine form, wichtige, important, feminine form, Baumart, tree, species, for, viele, many, or much, but in this case many, 100, 100, Insektenarten, insect, Insekten, insect and insect is the same. Arten means species, plural form. Und, and, ist deshalb, is therefore, also, auch ist also, von, of, großem, big, basically, huge, groß means big or huge, großem, von wem, like, of whom, von wem, großem, therefore it's großem, because it's dative case, ökologischen Wert. So, ecological, you could say, Wert, which means value or worth. Is there another? No, you can't dissect that further, but like, for example, werten is like to value something, to appreciate something, to, no, not necessarily appreciate, but like to judge something rather. And, yeah. So, the oak is a important tree species for many hundreds insect species and is therefore also of big ecological value. And I think you can translate that directly into English, not directly, like you can take that sentence and it would make sense in English, so I'm not going to translate that again. Unsere Eichen wachsen natürlicherweise vor allem in Mischwäldern, zum Beispiel zusammen mit Hainbuchen, Linden, Ahornen, Birken und Kiefern. Unsere Eichen, our oaks, plural form, therefore it's unsere, die Eichen, die Eichen, wachsen, grow. We had that also in a previous episode. Wachsen can either be wachsen in terms of like to grow, which is I think mostly used, or to wax, for example, to wax your legs and to get rid of the hair follicles, something like that. And because it derives from the word wax, it would basically be the same as if in English to grow wasn't to grow but to wax. So, and wachsen natürlicherweise, naturally, you could say kind of naturally, but naturally, of course, because in English it's that way. But weise, how do I explain that? Weise is always like, weise in general means way, kind of, manner, fashion. We have that kind of famous, it's not necessarily a saying, but like word cluster where we say Art und Weise. This is like coming up all the time. Die Art und Weise, auf die ich etwas tue. Or like, ich mag nicht die Art und Weise, die oder wie er das macht. Like, for example, that. I don't know why it's always Art und Weise, because like, why do you have to say a second word which is basically the same as that? I mean, of course, in different circumstances it's not the same. You can't say, for example, die Weise der Frösche, because like die Art der Frösche, which refers to the classification or type of frogs, and Weise is more like way of doing something. I don't know, something like that. But in general, in this case, why do you have to say to? But this is just the way I think German has evolved over the centuries, and nowadays we still say that, or we say that after the, like, what do you say, evolving of this kind of, I would call it a word cluster or saying or whatever you want to call it. So, natürlicherweise, to go back to that, natürlich means natural. Or, of course, if you were to say that, like, in terms of responding to somebody's previous, whatever they said, like sentence, comment, whatever, you say natürlich, and you say with that, of course, but in general, in terms of like describing something, it means naturally. And natürlicherweise basically means if it were to be completely natural. And so our oaks grow if it were to be completely natural, vor allem, above all, in, not if it were to be like in completely natural circumstances, you could say. Or how do you say that? Natürlicherweise, maybe it's rather like as it's foreseen by nature, you could say, like as it's created by nature. Vor allem, above all, in Mischwäldern. So Mischwald means mixed forest, basically, so it means Laubwald, I believe it's called, the deciduous forest, and Nadelwald, coniferous forest, or coniferous forest. So that means that these kind of two, you could say, types of trees are combined, and they don't necessarily care too much in which like type of forest they grow. So in Mischwäldern, but typically more in a mixed forest, apparently. Zum Beispiel, this is also a kind of saying, and it of course means for example, but it's slightly different in English, because in English you say of course for, in German we don't say für Beispiel, but yeah. Zum Beispiel is our for example, and zusammen means together, mit, with, Hainbuchen, which is, we had that in some previous episode where I said it's the like kind of fake beaches, but also I think probably the most popular tree in Germany, maybe together with like real beeches. Hornbeams it's called. Then we have linden, which I think it's called base or something, or just linde. Ahornen, which is what's it called? I forgot the word. Maples. Maple leaves, of course, the famous Canadian NHL team, ice hockey. Birken, which is birches, you could say. There are also different species, like the yellow birch in German, gelb Birke. I think Weißbirke, it's also called like white birch. Und Kiefern, which was a pine or spruce, I think pine, and pine trees. So, our oaks grow naturally, or like, yeah, you could say naturally, or let me just translate that. Maybe I'm just dancing around the point. Yeah, naturally. I'm just gonna stick to naturally. Grow naturally or by nature. Vor allem, above all, in mixed forest, for example, together with hornbeams, linde trees, I don't know. Maple leaves. Is it not maple leaves? Why do I always say maple leaves? Maples, I think. Maples, birches, and pine trees. So, our oaks naturally grow above all or mostly in mixed forest, for example, together with hornbeams, linde trees, maples, birches, and pine trees. And then the last sentence. Eichen wachsen zwar verhältnismäßig langsam, können aber bei guter Qualität sehr gute Holzpreise erzielen. So, oaks grow, but zwar is a very what's it called? Special word in German. It's kind of like they do something, but, and it kind of indicates that there is a but, which in German is called aber. So they grow, indeed, you could say. Verhältnismäßig, that derives from the word Verhältnis, which means relation or in like proportion to something, compared to whatever. Im Verhältnis zu, for example. Verhältnis zu, in relation to, which this basically means verhältnismäßig. This is basically the same as verhältnismäßig. Relatively. No, it's not necessarily the same, but kind of the same in German. So relatively. But in Verhältnis zu, you need, of course, in Verhältnis zu what? So in comparison to what, or in relation to what? So relatively, they grow, indeed, relatively slowly, langsam. This is kind of maybe also might be confusing because we have the word lang and we have the word kind of Samen, which I don't know where this derives from, but definitely not from the word Same, which means seed, or can also mean sperm cell. And langsam, I think it's just like some older suffix of like, in English you would call it lee, like slowly or something. And so oaks do grow, or grow indeed, relatively slowly, können aber bei guter Qualität sehr gute Holzpreise erzielen. Can, but, here we have our buts, which this already indicated. Can, but, although, in this case but, bei, at, in general, or by, but in this case I think at, guter, good, Qualität, which means quality, sehr gute, very good, Holzpreise, wood prices, erzielen. I think we also had that in, where was that? Here, I think it's also, we have that. So, can achieve very good wood prices. Erzielen generally means like, there are some word Ziel, which means goal. And erzielen basically means to reach a goal, I think. Like, for example, is there a use in that? Einen Elfmeter erzielen, I think. for the football fans among you. If Meter erzielen, like to score something, score a penalty. Score is also indicating, I think, that something is being reached in terms of a goal. And können, so can, but at, or in this case bei guter Qualität is kind of a conditional or a condition. Bei guter Qualität, so if it has good quality. Bei in general means at or by, I think. Or it can also mean with or something. During, by, upon, near, among. If you're an English speaker, which I assume you are, it can be a bit confusing if you look at this word like for the first time, but I think you probably haven't, but maybe. But in general it means, in terms of location, by, at, next to, but in this case bei guter Qualität, if it has good quality, basically. Sehr gute Holzpreise erzielen, very good wood. Holz means wood. Preise, derived from the word Preis, is plural form. Preis is plural, Preis is price. So prices. Prices, erzielen, score, achieve. So oaks grow indeed relatively slowly, but, or can, but by or at good quality, very good wood prices, score. So oaks grow indeed relatively slowly, but can, if the quality of the wood is good, achieve very high wood prices. Yeah, and that was it for today with the oak episode, which is the 4th episode of, I believe, 13 episodes. So 7 more to go. No, 7? I can't really do maths today. So not 7, it is 5 more. Not 5. We have already done. Wait, am I stupid? Am I really that stupid? We have 9 more to go. And yeah. So that was it for today. If you have any question, write it in the comments. If you want to leave a like, subscribe if you want to, and see you in the next episode. Bye!